Hello and welcome to another edition of Address-Based Layout Randomization. My name is John Strand and I'm joined today with Serena, who's a bit tired because she drove through lots of America, and specifically she survived Wyoming, and that is a round of applause. So congratulations on that. Made that drive so many times. Well, today, as always, this particular edition of Address-Based Layout Randomization is brought to you by Black Hills Information Security. By the way, we have a security operations center. We do incident response work, and we do this little thing called penetration testing. If you'd like to know more, send an email to consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com. It is also brought to you by Antisyphon Infosec Training. If you're looking for computer security training that is not ridiculously expensive, gets you a full access to the cyber range, a full year access of updates of all the different classes, and you want to help support the pay what you can training that we've been doing, check us out at Antisyphon Infosec Training. So, Serena, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, so let's go ahead and let's jump in. I'm going to be a little bit blind with my screen, so she's going to be asking questions on your behalf. So what we're going to do is we're going to do this right here. All right, so the first thing that I wanted to address is what exactly is SQL injection and how does SQL injection actually work? Well, whenever you're trying to identify SQL injection, one of the first things that you need to understand is what exactly does a database or web server that's feeding data into a database interpret as data, and what does it interpret as executable code? So for my quick first example, I'm going to be using the Damn Vulnerable Web application, which is fantastic for getting started with these types of attacks. But what's weird is I'm going to start out not with SQL injection, but instead I'm going to start out with command injection. Tricked ya, going someplace completely different. So let's go ahead and let's jump in and zoom in here. So let's say that I enter an IP address. If I go 8.8.8.8, like so, and I submit a ping to Google, I just pinged Google. Takes a couple of seconds for it to come back and I get the response. Now, the problem with this particular application is it is submitting the request or the actual input that I provide as a user, and it's submitting it to the command prompt. Now, whenever you submit something to the command prompt or you submit something to, let's say, a SQL database, there are certain characters that will be interpreted as data, and there'll be certain characters that are interpreted as executable code. So if I were to do something, let's do 8.8.8.8, and then I do a semicolon, which is a command delimiter, and I type ls semicolon, and I type some more gibberish, it's going to submit that to the it's going to submit that to the operating system. And then what it's going to do is it's going to execute the first command, and then it's going to execute the second command, which is where I told it just to print out ls. So this means that semicolon is being interpreted by the operating system. So let's go ahead and build some more. So I can go 8.8.8 semicolon ls semicolon cat Etsy password. Oh, I got to put in the forward slash there. Etsy password, like that. And then I can do semicolon echo hello world. Like so, like that. And then I can hit submit. And let's see if it actually does all of those things. So that semicolon being a command delimiter allows me to chunk up and send multiple different commands into the operating system. So it ran my ping command, then it ran my ls command, then it dumped Etsy password, and then it printed out hello world, right? So it's interpreting that, it's receiving data and command characters, and it's going to process all of them. So it receives the request to ping, sees the semicolon, means that it's going to execute the semicolon, which means it's going to run another command, and then it executes it. This is actually very similar whenever we're looking at SQL injection, because all of the different most of the SQL injection vulnerabilities that exist out there are SQL injection vulnerabilities that are where we can submit command characters to the database. Believe it or not, those are data. So if I were to put in a user ID, let's just say Strand.js, and then submit that request, it comes back with nothing, right? If I put in admin like that, those are data sets, and it's being sent to the database, and the database is getting that request, and it's doing nothing, I guess, whatever. But what happens whenever I submit something like an apostrophe, right? If I send an apostrophe in, it generates a SQL syntax error because that apostrophe was actually sent to the SQL database itself. So it says you have an error in your SQL syntax, and it says check your, oops, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. It says check the manual that corresponds to your Mariah database server and version for the right syntax. And then look at this. Look at this. We have all of these little apostrophes, right? We have one, two, three, four, five. That's interesting because it's mismatched. So if I were to put in, let's say, another one, see, we get a different error. We don't. If I put in three apostrophes, we're back to the error again. And the reason why is those number of apostrophes are mismatched. It expects them to show up like in pairs, right? And you're usually going to take user input and you're going to put it in. So we can do some additional things. And every time we get an error, we get more information. Like I could do apostrophe admin and it comes back and it says admin. You can see I have a mismatched number of apostrophes. Okay. What if I put admin like that? Does I still get an error? Still get an error, right? We have that mismatched set of apostrophes. Now, if you actually go to the Damn Vulnerable web app, it's giving you a list of different cheat sheets that you can actually go and you can get more information about what SQL injection is. And it's even telling you that this particular database is a MySQL database or Mariah database and has all these different select statements that you can pull from. But whenever you're trying to pull data from a SQL injection vulnerability, a lot of times you have to do something called a union select. Let me show you what that looks like. So this is actually from the class that I'm teaching next week, the Intro to Security class. If you go to Antisyphon's website and you look at on-demand training or pay what you can training, I do a pay what you can class on getting started in security. And this is one of those things that we teach in that security class, which you can totally take for free if you want to, or you could pay. That's nice. I like money too. Now, what's interesting about this is we do a union select. And when we did that union select, you can see that we're actually now pulling data. First name and last name is admin. We got Gordon Brown. We got Hackme. We got Pablo Picasso. But down here, we're actually getting user IDs and passwords for the backend database. That is pretty fancy right there. So you can actually get this, like this password hash for the admin account, and you can do something like go to a crack station, like so, and it'll do a lookup of that hash. It's going to ask me if I'm a human or a robot. Checked out. Comes back and it says, I was able to find that this particular password hash and the password is password. Ooh, being crafty in the Damn Vulnerable web app. So that is just a quick overview of what SQL injection is. And it'll also give you an idea of how bad it can be. If the attacker can actually pull down and get straight raw password hashes off of the system, then they can crack those password hashes and they can do very, very, very bad things to your database. So let's actually take a look at a website and let's kind of go from beginning to end. So we have this one website, the Snooper Security website, and this is part of MetaCTF. We have all of these different video cameras that are showing you camera 1, camera 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And just so you know, these security cameras, this is absolutely terrifying, right? Camera 1's a lot of really bad traffic. And camera 2, I'm just guessing it's in Russia, maybe? I'm not sure. Anytime I see people flying through windows, it's not a dash cam. Maybe it's not. Camera 3, we've got a Batmobile. I don't know. These are crazy things. So we're going to try to identify SQL injection in this particular page. So we're going to do this by starting with Z attack proxy, because we can try to do this automatically. But the problem with trying to do these things automatically is it sucks. That's right. It's not fun to do. So we're going to open up Google Chrome and we're going to send our requests through Z attack proxy. In my Chrome setup, I've got this wonderful little thingy-majiggy here that allows me to automatically change my proxies. And I'm going to put in meta problems. We're going to go to the website. We're going to get an error. This is normal. It says your connection's not private. And the reason why it says the connection's not private is because Z attack proxy is proxying that communication. So I have to select advanced, proceed to metaproblems.com, says it's unsafe. And then it's going to load that data. But now I can see everything through Z attack proxy. I can actually see the pages. I can see this parameter, this view camera PHP ID. That is a parameter. And whenever we're doing SQL injection attacks, we want to identify those parameters so that we can run SQL injection attack type thingies against them. What exactly do we mean when we say SQL injection type thingies? Well, when we're talking about identifying SQL injection type thingies, something as simple as a single tick will allow us to identify that we have a SQL injection vulnerability. Why? Because we received an error directly from the database. In fact, if you take this error right here and you go, you have a error in your SQL syntax, check your Mariah database server, we know that it's a Mariah database. And we know that we talked directly to the database and that database gave us some results back, or more accurately, it gave us some responses back. So what we want to do is we want to take advantage of the amazing capabilities that Z attack proxy has, and we can do things like do a crawl to spider all the different pages and the input fields on this specific website. So here in a couple of seconds, it finishes, comes up, it identifies this parameter, this view camera parameter, and I can right click on that and I can go attack and I can run an active scan. Now, what it's going to do is it's going to attempt to attack that particular parameter with a variety of different attack methodology. Some of them will be simple command injection. Some of them will be SQL injection. Some of them will be cross-site scripting. Because it's one parameter, it tends to go a little bit faster. Z attack proxy, I'm talking you up here. This is where you go faster. Anyway, I don't think it's found the vulnerability yet. It's got the content security policing, anti-click jacking. It's running really slow, maybe because people are playing along with me right now. But suffice to say, what Z attack proxy does is it's going to complete its scan out and it's going to identify that SQL injection vulnerability. It's not necessarily going to exploit it. We're going to have to do that. Then I'm going to jump over to Kali for us to actually do that part of the attack as well, which, to be honest with you, I've already done. Whenever you're doing timing-based or these different types of SQL injection vulnerabilities, it can take a long time to identify the vulnerabilities and can take even longer to exploit those vulnerabilities. So I guess you could say I went and I baked this cake before this particular session even started. All right, so let's go through. It says it's completed. It says alerts. Aha! It's got SQL injection. Specifically, it's saying it has SQL injection in the ID parameter, which coincidentally enough is like the only parameter that we see right here. So that's it. So it's making it easier for us. So we were able to identify that we had SQL injection in that specific parameter at this specific URL right here. So we can actually go ahead and open image in new tab, and you can actually see what that looks like in that full request. So you can see meta problems gives us the random string associated with that particular page, view camera.php, and we can see ID equals 4. We can change it to 1. We change the camera to 1. We can change it to 2, viewing camera 2. Then we can change it to 3 and can change it to camera 3. So this is literally like, Hollywood style hacking. We've got this parameter. We can jump in. We can see the cameras and we can be like, all right, James Bond, watch out. He's behind you. Oh God, you're dead. So we can actually see those cameras as they occur. Now, what we want to do is we want to use SQLmap to actually exploit that. And then we're going to circle back around and we're going to talk about what we can do to try to stop these types of attacks, because it doesn't make much sense for us to actually talk about vulnerabilities unless we talk about some of the defenses that we can put in place as well. All right, so let's move on to the exploitation. All right, so if we go over to our Kali VM, as I said, I've pre-cooked some of this. And I want to start with the very beginning because it's a very good place to start. I'm actually going to open up another workspace like so, and I'm going to open up another command prompt so I can show you what this stuff looks like when it runs. All right. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to tell, come on, we're going to tell Kali we want it to identify the database. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start by running this particular command in my other workspace. Go copy selection. There we go. And then we're going to jump over to the other workspace and we'll just paste that in. There we go. And we're going to let this run. All right. It's going to ask us a question here in a second about cookies. Whenever you're working with SQLmap, there's some really cool things that exist. One, you can actually pass a cookie through to SQLmap. Now, the reason why you would want to do that is you would want to go through your session and gain access to a session identifier for authentication. Many SQL injection vulnerabilities exist post authentication. You have some that exist pre authentication. This one doesn't have any authentication, but it still grants a cookie to the user. So when SQLmap connects to it, it says, hey, I got this cookie. Is it okay if I actually use this cookie? And you're like, yes, cookie monster. You go ahead and you do it. And when it uses that cookie, it's not a problem at all. It's got CAM session ID. If this was authenticated, you would want to authenticate to the web server, identify your parameter, and then pass the full URL and the parameter to SQLmap, but you'd also want to pass it your cookie. It'll pop up and say, hey, I've got this cookie. You can say, okay, replace it with this one instead. Now, whenever we ran it, it said, okay, we identified that the database, we wanted to identify the database. And it says right up front, it says it's a SQLite database. This is different than the example I just did in Damn Vulnerable Web App. Damn Vulnerable Web App, I was just using it to articulate the vulnerability. Thought it was a good place, and you can go and you can download Damn Vulnerable Web App. You can play with it. But whenever we're going to the camera website has a different database backend. The camera website has a SQLite database. That's actually really important for us for actually trying to exploit this. In addition to that, it basically identified that the ID parameter is a get-based parameter, and it also might be injectable to blind SQL injection, specifically time-based blind SQL injection. Now, the reason why that's kind of important is it's tough. All right. So if you go to, if we go back to Damn Vulnerable Web App, we have here, which I actually closed the entire thing out. Let me actually open that back up. Oh, I've got it open right down here. There we go. If we go to the intro labs, this is what we call error-based SQL injection, where if you screw up, the database immediately gives you an error. It's like, you got an error in your SQL syntax. And that's really great because it's giving us direct feedback right in the web app, and the web app's taking that database data and it's posting it right to us. This doesn't happen all that often. More often than not, we get blind SQL injection, which means we're able to send commands to the database, but we're not exactly getting those results back to us, at least not in this awesome, crystal clear manner. So when SQLmap is running, SQLmap basically says, yeah, there's probably SQL injection. And specifically, there is SQL injection that is it is blind SQL injection, and it's timing based. Now, what does it mean by timing based? Well, it looks at the timing intervals on the responses to make a determination whether or not your request was correct or not. So if you do an incorrect request, usually incorrect requests come back really fast. So if the web page comes back with 404 not found or a 200 error, that's actually error based. But if the website responds very, very quickly, different than if it's slower. So if I actually have it do a tick and it takes a few seconds longer to respond, I can actually start doing that timing and start launching my attacks based on that timing to make a determination as to whether or not my commands were successfully executed. So that is where it identifies that I have a parameter and I have a timing-based SQL injection vulnerability. And if we look at this command that we have right here, we're doing SQLmap and we're specifying a URL. We're putting in the URL of the camera website, and we gave it literally the parameter that it should go after. And we're saying, hey, SQLmap, could you find out the database for me? Because that would be amazing. And it did. It actually was able to identify the database as a SQLite database and the parameter as injectable. All right, so that is the first command that we did. So the second command that I did, this one actually takes a little bit longer. And I'm going to go ahead and kick it off in my other terminal. We're going to copy that selection, go to my other terminal. There we go. Control C, Control L, and we're going to paste in. So now the command that we're running here is basically saying we're going to use SQLmap. We have the URL is the same one that we just ran a little while ago trying to identify the database. We're now telling it, I don't want you to tell me what the database is. I just want you to dump the tables. What are the tables that exist on this database? And then I'm telling it threads, there are 2 threads. That means it's going to run concurrently. We got the cookie question again, and it comes back way faster, probably some cached results. And it says, okay, this is a SQLite master database. And we were able to see that the database tables we have are private cameras, public cameras, and SQLite sequence. Now that went really fast, right? But I cheated. I wanted to show you that I cheated because, to be perfectly honest, if you actually run this, it takes a long time. In fact, if I go back to my other screen, I can show you how long it took the first time I ran it. Over here, show you real quick. So I started my additional SQLite. It started at 14:28:47, and it actually ended at 14:33. So that took a long time. It wasn't instant. So it takes a lot longer. The other thing that's interesting is you can see as it's receiving the data, it's fetching the tables from the SQLite master database. So it's going to query that database table. And you can see all of that in Pentest Monkey's cheat sheets. It'll tell you what type of request you can do. And it found 3 database tables. It found the length of the query output was 15, then 14, then 15, and it was able to get the name of the database tables. So we got 3 tables. The first one's 15 characters long, SQLite sequence. The second one is 14 characters long, public cameras. And the third one is 15 characters long, private cameras. And then it actually just kind of displays those database tables to us, which is pretty cool, right? And it also let us know that it's out of date. I haven't updated my Kali instance in a while. Now, the next query that we do, we're actually going to query data out. And this is something that actually runs really, really, really slow whenever you run it. And the reason why is it has to do a series of queries, and it does the queries 1 character at a time. All right, so we're going to go ahead and I'll rerun this command in my other window. Copy selection. Go over here and type in S and then paste it in. There we go. And basically what we're telling it to do now is, sorry, I keep doing that, but I have to jump out to my Windows system, zoom in, and it goes SQLmap. We give it a URL, but now we're saying the table that we want you to dump is private cameras, and we want you to dump the table. Just dump the results of the table. And once again, we're saying the number of threads is equal to 2. So it's connecting to the target URL. We got the cookie question. There we go. And now it's pulling the data. Now, it went fast once again, but once again, if we back up and we see how long it took the original query to run, well, the original query started at 14:33 and it finished at 14:40. So that took a long time for it to actually query and pull the results from 3 different table or from that specific table. So once again, if we zoom in on this one, you can see what is in that specific database table. And it says, okay, the one row that we have, the ID is 7. I don't know what 50 and 100 is. The name is Secret Camera 1, and the stream is actually the flag for the Capture the Flag competition in MetaCTF. So that would be the data, the sensitive data that we want to pull. So all of this, as I said, it's actually stored. And it basically is not going to rerun the command, which is great. It's just going to give us the output that it was able to receive. But I wanted to show you what it looked like. And I also wanted to show you that it does take a while, because what it does when it's running and it takes 7 minutes is it dumps each character. So it'll go W, H, A, which is kind of crazy, right? And how it's working is it's like, The first, it'll be like, the column of stream is the first character an A? It's like, no. Is it a B? Is it a C? No. And it's doing this all based on timing and how long it takes for that database to respond. And then when it says F, it takes a little bit longer and then it starts all over because it knows that first character is an F and then it starts all over again. So SQL injection, especially blind SQL injection, can take a while to actually get the data. Once again, if you're doing any testing, you got to be very, very careful what it is you actually request because sometimes your tools will run until the heat death of the universe. So let's talk a little bit about defenses for two reasons. The first reason why I want to talk about defense is because I don't want Google to ban hammer our videos. GLE. Almost misspelled Google while I was talking. So we're just going to go to Google. We're going to pull that up, and we're going to do let's do SQL injection protection and OWASP. All right. Whatever. All right. So if we go through, we've got OWASP. Oh no, that wasn't the one I wanted. That's talking about SQL injection attacks. Here we go. Injection prevention. So let's go through these prevention techniques and what exactly does it mean. So whenever we're talking about trying to prevent SQL injection vulnerabilities, one of the things that you're going to read in here, and I'll talk about it in just a little bit, is basically there's two main ways that you can shut down SQL injections. The first thing is you can do parameterized stored procedures. And what that actually does, it receives the input from the user. Doesn't matter what that input is, and it defines it as user data. And whenever that procedure comes in, it is data that gets loaded into a variable and then gets processed on the database. And that's absolutely fantastic, right? That's basically defining your data set. And this particular vulnerability, just so you know, this is like something that has been around forever. Like if you look even at format string vulnerabilities, you could put in %x, %x, %x as user input, and it would literally dump like the next 3 memory address locations because it was interpreting %x as a variable for the printf function. Then the command injection vulnerability, it's a semicolon. It's going to execute that semicolon. But if you can take that as a variable and you can load it into a variable and it's defined that this is data, and then it processes based on the data, instead of you doing a process of apostrophe or 1 equals 1 semicolon dash dash and the database executing it, it'll actually look for the user, let's say apostrophe or 1 equals 1 semicolon dash dash. It's properly defining what the input is. The other thing that they recommend, this is actually their defense right here. Got parameterized stored procedures, and you can see or 1 equals 1. It'll actually be the string Tom apostrophe or 1 equals 1. That's one of them. The other thing is you can do input validation. And this also very much goes with the escaping user supplied input. Whenever we do input validation, we're actually making sure before it even hits the database that it is the type of data that we're looking for. Give you an example. If I'm putting in a name, right? Like John, Strand JS, whatever it is, well, I don't have a lot of users with apostrophes in their names, or dash dash, or a pound prompt, or a star, or any of those. In fact, you can actually ban those characters from being used for users to create their user IDs, just as an example with user IDs. Now, this gets a little bit more complicated whenever you're looking at password fields, right? Users, we expect them to use special characters. So, what can we do with that? One of the things we can do is we can escape user input. And we could even do like basically character substitution. For example, instead of, if somebody put in, a single tick or a single apostrophe, you could replace that with an ampersand AP like that. So you see this sometimes whenever you have badges printed and somebody's name has like a dash or an apostrophe in it, you'll see these escape character sequences that'll replace the metadata characters, the data that will actually be processed by the database itself. It'll replace that with something that is neutral and won't cause an issue. So what is the best thing to do? Input validation? Do we do character substitution? Do we do Parameterized stored procedures, it's easy. The answer is all of them. And it's absolutely critical to kind of start with an understanding of what a what a SQL injection vulnerability is, how you can identify that vulnerability with something like Z attack proxy, and how you can exploit it. So once again, let's walk through those steps. So if we go through, we identified the SQL injection vulnerability by using Z attack proxy. We simply ran an active scan against the specific parameter, and Z attack proxy came back and said, yo, there's SQL injection in the ID parameter. Then we took that SQL injection vulnerability and we passed that vulnerability over to SQLmap, and we told SQLmap to identify that vulnerability, and it did. Identify the backend database, and it did. Identify the tables, and it did. And then finally pull the database from the database table, which is what we did there. So once again, going through and identifying these vulnerabilities, everyone should have the capability and the knowledge on how you can do a cursory level research on identifying these vulnerabilities. Because most of the SQL injection vulnerabilities that you see out there are SQL injection vulnerabilities that are really stupid easy to identify. I mean, if you look at some of the most egregious vulnerabilities that have happened in public exploits, like HB Gary is a really good example. That was a SQL injection vulnerability that was in a get parameter in the URL in a custom CRM. That is something that absolutely should have been detected. So when you see these in the wild and you review the actual breach data and how it actually occurred, many of them are really easy to identify. And that's why it's so important for us to get familiar with tools like SQLmap, get familiar with tools like Z attack proxy. All right. So that kind of gets us through the kind of overview. Now I want to move into questions. Once again, the goal of doing all of this is to really just kind of share with people how these tools and how these things work very quickly. So what do we got for questions, Serena?
We didn't really have many questions. There's some comments about SQLmap taking a while or
It does.
being
One
intense.
of the things that you can do is you can mess with threads, but you have to be really careful because what happens with SQLmap is here. Let me see if I can get it to puke. Let me go back to my VM and let's go ahead and go to this view. Can you see my camera? Okay.
Yep.
All right. So let's set
Pull
our
that
threads
up
to
a
like
little bit.
what's that?
Can you pull the window up?
Like that? Is that better? I zoomed in a
Yeah.
little bit. Oh
Yeah.
crap. That's right. This is completely cached. I'm not going to get it. You can kick the threads up and it will go faster. But one of the problems with trying to make it go faster is you can overwhelm the web server or you can overwhelm the database. This is very similar to like doing password attacks if you were using something like Hydra, which is like 26 threads or 36 threads. I can't remember off the top of my head. But you can overwhelm a service like Telnet or SSH. And with most services, you only want to do like 2 threads. And actually at BHIS, we do 1 when we're doing password spraying attacks.
Mhm.
Very similar to SQL injection. You can speed it up by kicking up the threads, but you also might lose fidelity or the database may stop responding. SQLmap is smart enough though, when it starts seeing that, it'll actually slow itself down. So it is something that happens. Just be careful with that as well. White Cyberduck was just pointing out whenever he was in my class last week, I got to meet White Cyberduck, which is pretty cool. I had like 25, 30 students all hitting the same database at the same time. It actually worked, but not real well. It just got really, 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 really super slow. But it's just very, very cool as well. All right. What other?
Brian says now this is likely bad if we put in any web addresses in Z attack proxy. Will it show us these vulnerabilities, or should
So
it?
that's a good question. So what I recommend doing if you want to identify these vulnerabilities and expand your SQL injection knowledge, there are websites out there like Damn Vulnerable Web App, which you can download and is a Docker. Let me reshare my screen. Let's go back to Win ADHD, and we've got my. There we go. Now you should be able to see the screen. You can actually go into like Docker, Damn Vulnerable Web App, and Docker actually has an entire category that's dedicated to this. using Bing to get to Google. I got to change this on my VM, Serena. It's crazy. And Docker. And with Docker, you can go right into vulnerables and you can pull it down and you can run it via a Docker command. In fact, said Docker command is right here. Just Docker run rm itp 8080 vulnerables damn vulnerable web app. So it's available there. The other thing, if you want, is you can do Acunetics art. Acunetics has a ton of really cool websites that are vulnerable to attacks. And you can actually like just take this, plug it right into Zed attack proxy, and just tell it to attack, and away it goes. There we go. And it will go through and identify a ton of different vulnerabilities, and it'll actually show up as a separate page here. So it just crawled it. Now it's actually doing the SQL injection attack against it. But these sites exist specifically to be attacked. So it's like, what is my purpose? You get me butter. Oh. So these are all the vulnerabilities. Unfortunately, it's mixing the vulnerabilities between the two sites, but it's actually going through and doing the active scan right now. I'm actually just going to stop it. So there are places where you can learn these skills and you can do it safely. You don't have to go about, attacking other people's websites. You should never, ever do that as well.
Jonathan asks, is this challenge getting retired?
This challenge is going to get retired at some point in the future. The name of this particular video is going to be SQLmap, so it'd be kind of hard for somebody to just jump in and see this video and then get points. But if you get points for it, great. Serena, I actually think that this particular challenge is overpowered. Like it's a 400-point challenge, and SQLmap lights it up like a Christmas tree. So we might end up nerfing it in the near future and trying to come up with a little bit more difficult one. I would like one. The cool thing about SQLmap is you can actually drop a shell on the system and access the shell through SQLmap, which is cool. I would like to have a challenge like that, but those are a little bit more difficult to write when you're trying to set up because you don't want somebody to nuke the operating system. So it's probably going to get retired, but we're going to do it in a batch of like 4. So this is just one where I'm using MetaCTF as an example to demonstrate this is a vulnerable type of vulnerability that you can go after. What else do we got?
I think that's all the questions that were in the chat, unless anyone wants to throw in some questions for last.
I like questions. I was worried though. Like I said, everything worked right before I did this, and I snapshotted all my VMs, and then reverted to the snapshot. And preparation sometimes still bites us in the ass as far as some of this goes. By the way, I was talking with Roman about the one that you were demonstrating. Roman has the ability for us to spool up instances directly in MetaCTF, so we don't have to use a VM. You can literally spin it up in the browser and launch the attack in the browser. So when we retire challenges in the future, I think we're gonna do that, Serena. I think that's better than us doing it locally, because he can spin up Windows systems and Kali instances and everything, and we'll get a chance to do that, which is just MetaCTF is awesome that way.
Yeah, I still need to rebuild my VMs. I was messing with it earlier, but I've been focused on this other this other thing that I'm making for YouTube. And I just think I need to redo it all completely.
Well, and it was funny because he was like, "Oh yeah, you should have asked me. I could have showed her how to do it." I'm like, "Dude, it was breaking her virtual machine. Like it was just breaking it." And he was like, "It's over SSH," and I'm like, "Dude, VMware is getting weird. Let's just be honest. It's getting strange."
Yeah, I don't know. Everything was fine until I connected to SSH, and then I would input commands, but it would be so slow to actually input the command. And then once you finally get it, after it taking forever, and you start capturing, it just crashes everything. And I'm like, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, let's wrap it up, everybody. Thank you so much for coming again, Serena. Thanks for hanging out. And I don't know what the hell was I doing tomorrow. I know Ryan's around here. What was the topic I did for tomorrow? I can't remember.
Hold on, I can find it.
Yeah.
It's in an email that I have to pull up.
John,
Tomorrow
I
is
need to know so I can
why are
prepare.
you not using Atomic Red Team?
Oh, cool. So we're going to do adversarial emulation tomorrow.
Ooh.
And it's cool because Carrie has her own. This is kind of something to prop up Carrie's class, and she has her own segments where she's doing this. And I'm really, really excited. She does that on Thursdays, right?
It's gonna be on Mondays after the newscasts.
Oh my gosh. So it's all adversarial emulation. And Serena, that one's going to be cool because
Mhm.
as new techniques show up, we could like show Atomic Red Team and how you can emulate those in your environment. So I'm
Yeah.
really excited about that.
That'll be cool. I think we should do a webcast on evasion.
We should. You're talking about the evasion toolkit or just like evasion techniques?
Just evasion in general.
Yes. Well, we used to do sacred cash cow tipping. We probably need to do another one. And let's just plan on doing that after Christmas, like in the New Year's,
Cool.
because that's fun. Because people get really, whenever you're on Christmas vacation, people are like, you shouldn't do anything. We've had some of our best attended webcasts between Christmas and New Year's because everyone is sick and tired of their family, and it's like, let's get together and let's do some hacky stuff. And people are like, yes,
Yeah.
dear God, yes, I can't eat any more ham or turkey. So,
Yep.
all right. With that, let's get out of here. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
everyone.
We'll see you tomorrow.
Kill it.